Joining me are Richard Dietz and Vince Rozier. Both gentlemen are seeking the same seat on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Guy.
Mr. Dietz, by coin flip, you will answer the first questions. It's always the broad biographical sketch. What makes you qualified to retain your seat? What is your experience? What makes you the best appellate court judge in this race?
Sure. Well, and first, thank you to UNC TV for hosting us here. I think this is a great public service. And to answer your question, I think 3 or 4 years ago, before I was a judge on the Court of Appeals, if you asked folks that knew me or had worked with me as a lawyer, what do you think Richard Dietz, what do you think his dream job is? Everybody would have said appellate judge or Court of Appeals judge. And I think that says a lot about the qualifications I have to hold this seat, because really my career has been defined by work in the state appellate courts. I started off, I had a lot of success in law school. I graduated first in my class at Wake Forest University, and that opened a lot of doors for me to pursue a lot of different types of things that oftentimes lawyers don't get a chance to do in their careers. So I clerked for 2 federal judges, really studied how the federal court system works, both the trial courts and the federal appeals courts. I was a research fellow for a while in Japan. I studied the difference between our constitutional law system and the laws in other countries. Then I came back. I was at a large firm in Washington, D.C. for a while, and then finally returned back home to North Carolina, to my home in Winston-Salem, and joined a firm there and just pursued a career that focused on trial and appellate litigation. And I think that's the key to being a good appellate judge, is combining trial experience with appellate experience. You'll often find lots of people that focus on one or the other, but you really need both. And that was my career. I did a lot of really high-profile cases, all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. If you Google my name, you can find courtroom sketches of me standing in the U.S. Supreme Court arguing cases. And that's something, there's only a few other people alive in North Carolina today that have been up there and had that kind of experience. And that's what I bring to the Court of Appeals, is really an unmatched exposure to broad areas of the law.
Mr. Rozier, you're in the race to win it. What sets you up to be the best judge for this seat?
Well, I think when you look at qualifications for the Court of Appeals, most people are looking for fairness and experience. They're looking for fairness because they want someone who is willing to follow the law, not promote themselves as being conservative or liberal or anything of that sort, but just following the law and using the laws in the U.S. Constitution and the Constitution of North Carolina as the compass. But then also when you look at what the Court of Appeals actually hears on a day-to-day basis, if you go back to 2015 and look at the state websites, you will find that about 70% of the cases that are heard by the Court of Appeals come from where I, as a district court judge, serve, or where I, as a former prosecutor, have served. And those are coming from the trial courts. I've tried nearly 70 jury trials, and so it's unmatched, at least in our race, as far as jury trial experience. And those are the types of cases that will go to the Court of Appeals. And then my experience as a Wake County District Court judge for 10 years, I think is unmatched in our race as well. Because, again, when you're looking at those cases that go to the Court of Appeals, family court cases, I'm a certified family court judge. Juvenile cases, certified juvenile court judge. 70% of the cases. What's lacking on the Court of Appeals right now, out of the 15 judges that we have, only 3 were actually judges prior to their service on the Court of Appeals. I think that perspective is missing, that decision-making experience on a day-to-day basis, making decisions in countless numbers of cases that impact the citizens of North Carolina. That experience is lacking. That experience is why I'm qualified.
Tell us about decision-making. A few things hit me. Fairness, you bring that up, decision-making. But decision-making, judges make decisions. Why interject that here? You're facing an incumbent who's made decisions. Why would voters care?
Well, I think they would care because, well, it's been described as principals who have never been teachers but are telling teachers what to do in the classroom. In this particular race, I've been one of those teachers. I've been in the classroom, I've been in the courtroom for 10 years. When you look at what the Court of Appeals rendered, or decisions written last year, there were about 151 cases that related to family court cases, that area of law. I've had experience myself of over 700 cases. When you look at trial cases and matters that go to trial, and you look at what the Court of Appeals wrote last year, the bulk of that comes to the area of law where I sit as a judge or I've had to make decisions as a prosecutor. The bulk of the work that is being done is trying to determine whether or not a judge made the proper call. And if someone has never been in that role, and if the court is lacking that voice, I think that there is a breadth of knowledge that is not being applied whenever these cases are being written. And frankly, whenever you talk to practitioners who deal with the bulk of this work, the 70% of the cases that the Court of Appeals has heard, very often they will comment that experience is apparently lacking just from the way that the decisions are written. And I think that having someone with my experience and 10 years of experience on the Court of Appeals and adding that voice will add greater confidence in the decisions that are made.
Well, both you gentlemen know about it. It's challenging to cover races. I'm just like any other voter at the end of the day. I'll go home and think about talking to both of you. But he brought up decision making. I sense there's different forms of experience. You bring something entirely different than Mr. Rozier, but he has said decision making. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think he makes a fair point that quite a bit of what comes to the Court of Appeals comes from the district court. So you need experience with those types of legal areas. So that includes your juvenile law, family law, misdemeanor criminal law, things like that. And of course, I have that experience. I was a trial lawyer before I became a Court of Appeals judge. And I don't think you have to be the referee, for example, in a football game to understand the game, just like you don't have to be a trial judge to understand the trial process. You just have to have experience being in the courtroom, seeing how everything works, and I've got that. What I have that my opponent doesn't is also the appellate experience, and you need both. After all, this is the Court of Appeals, and what we do in the Court of Appeals is not the same as what trial judges do. We decide cases, we must reach fair, just results, but our opinions that we write also set precedent for future cases. You have to be a legal scholar and really understand the law to do a good job in this role, and I think one of the challenges that many folks have that want to be good appellate judges is just no experience with appeals. I'm the most experienced appellate lawyer, I think, to ever serve on the Court of Appeals in the court's history. And right now, I'm the only board-certified specialist in appeals on the 15-member court and the only candidate for Court of Appeals who's a board-certified specialist. And I think that matters that you bring both the appellate specialization and the trial court experience. You've got to combine them both.
Walk me through the decision-making process as a judge on the Court of Appeals, how you approach it philosophically. I'm not going to hit you on any kind of particular issues, but there's got to be a method to it, I would think. And how do you weigh an issue? How do you know you've got the decision right when you make one?
That's right. It's very different than what trial judges do. We, as appellate judges, spend a lot of time reading and a lot of time writing because most of the cases we decide, the lawyers even aren't actually coming to court and arguing. Those are only in the cases where we have oral argument. And even in those cases, there are no witnesses, the parties in the case aren't there, no juries, those sorts of things. It's just judges reviewing whether there's been a legal error in the case. And so that is scholarship, researching the law, reading the parties' briefs and understanding their legal arguments, no matter how complicated, and then distilling it into a written opinion that not only lawyers, but the public can read and understand. And I think it's a very important skill to be able not only to reach the right result, but to convey it to the public in a way that they can understand.
Mr. Dietz brings it up, legal scholar, well studied at Wake Forest. You say I've worked with people, 700 plus cases. Walk me through your decision-making process. How would it differ bringing your perspective into the Court of Appeal?
Well, I would argue that a lot of the Superior Court judges and the District Court judges across the state would find it insulting that whenever their process of rendering a decision is not considered scholarly. We have the challenge. We have the challenge of making numerous decisions and applying the law. There seems to be an impression that because we're in the trial court setting that we don't have to stop, pause, go back, reevaluate the law, take the facts that were at hand in that particular case, and then make a decision. One difference that we don't have the benefit of is we don't have the clerks to help us do the research. We don't have the clerks to help us do the writing. We have to do all of that on our own. And so taking that experience to the Court of Appeals would be similar, except for we won't have to imagine what it was actually like in that courtroom because we know, because we've been there. And that is the type of experience. And so the step-by-step process would alter. Yes, there would be more research. Yes, there would be more reading. But still at the bottom of the bottom line, at the end of the day, the challenge is still the same, trying to apply the law to the facts that are at hand, whether or not it's someone who's verbally stating those facts beside us, or if we're reading what happened, or if we're reading the arguments of the attorneys who are submitting briefs. But the fact that we have multiple occasions, the 700 to 151 is just family court. This is something that I do on a daily basis. And being from Wake County and for 10 years, I've had greater experiences and greater opportunities, just voluminous in comparison to some others. And so, and again, it's not only that, it's what we have done in our own experiences. Judge Dietz talks about his experience as an appellate advocate. But I think that trial court experience of actually arguing in front of a jury, because the Court of Appeals is going to hear cases about what happened in a jury trial. And having that breadth of knowledge, like I said, nearly 70 cases, being there, making the statements, making the arguments, understanding what actually impacts jurors. Because the Court of Appeals has to hear and make a determination about whether or not they thought a juror may have been swayed one way or another, or whether a Superior Court judge made a proper decision as far as a jury instruction. If you haven't been there, you just don't know. And having been there for plenty of occasions, and that having been the breadth of work for a significant period of time, just in comparison, for about an 18-month period, I tried more cases in Wake County than anyone did. And so that experience, I think, speaks volumes.
What's the balance, Mr. Dietz, in this argument? I get a scholar. I get the person who works, Mr. Rozier works with directly from the bench, works with juries. If I'm a voter, how do I weigh that? Because you both have such different experiences. Why is one superior to the other? And if I have to vote for one of you, what do I do?
Well, I think one of the things to keep in mind is, as I mentioned before, it's a combination of trial and appellate experience. And I also think understanding what the people that come to the court system face, the challenges that they're exposed to in the justice system. I mean, that's what's important. And that was my career before I came on the Court of Appeals, not just handling the cases for constitutional law, civil rights, a number of areas that where if you're a district court judge, you've never had any exposure at all. But more importantly, I did a tremendous amount of pro bono work. Access to justice has always been a real passion for me. And in fact, in the few years before I came on the courts, I spent almost 1,000 hours just providing free legal work to people, because I understand that's the challenge in the court system. It's not sitting up on the bench with the robe. That's the person in the room that's having a struggle. It's the people figuring out, how do I even afford to pay a lawyer? And so by sitting next to actual real people and being their client in family law and criminal law and all different sorts of areas, that's how you get a sense of what's really going on in the courtroom. And I have stood there and argued cases at the trial level. So I have the jury experience. I have the experience with all those sorts of pretrial things, and in a very wide range of areas, not just in state district court, but in federal courts, in state superior court, in all kinds of cases, constitutional law, business law. And I think it's that broad perspective, bringing to the Court of Appeals and combining it with appeals experience. That's what the public wants. I mean, they want us to raise the bar. They're looking to say, you know, who is the person that's going to be on the Court of Appeals doing the work that's really making North Carolina proud, kind of setting a standard for the Court of Appeals. And I think it's not really about experience in places like traffic court. It's about experience in places like the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's the work that I did as an appellate lawyer.
Any thoughts on that? It's almost a rebuttal situation. I have a follow-up question, but do you have anything to say, or do we move on?
There's the impression that district court judges only hear traffic cases, and I guess that's where the comment comes from. And there's the impression that because we don't only just read, that we're not scholars. I can spend 1 year deciding custody cases, and that's going to change the life of someone for the rest of their life. That's not a traffic case, and that has significant importance, and that is getting in contact with people and understanding what's really happening in their lives. And so it's a debate that the voters will have to render a decision upon.
How different could the Court of Appeals look in the small ways that one judge, a new judge in your case, being elected? How would it look different? How would it feel different? How would we read about it in the papers or on the blogs if you were elected?
Well, hopefully you wouldn't be reading about it, because the decisions would be such that it makes sense for those people who are actually those practitioners that Judge Dietz talks about, because they would have that confidence based on their experience, based on what they deal with on a daily basis and what we see. Because what all of this is about is what's going to happen in court. And so whenever I've been in court and I've had to read a decision that comes down from the Court of Appeals, if it has no applicability, if it's not applicable to no application and to what we're doing on a daily basis, then that is when you may read about it. And the reason that you may read about that is because a decision is being offered by someone who's not been there. It's not just traffic, it's custody cases, it's domestic violence cases, it's the armed robbery cases that I tried. It's the murder cases that I handled whenever I was a prosecutor. It's those child support cases where you're trying to put food on someone's table. It's those situations where an officer is involved with someone on the road and they're trying to make sure that they go home to their family. Those are the things that we deal with on a daily basis. And again, it's a decision that voters will have to render their decision. But I think there's nothing that can replace experience. I'm giving you numbers. I'm giving you numbers to support some of the things that I've heard, and I'm not just trying to give you over in course of the 10 years. I'm just giving you numbers based on what the Court of Appeals has done and what experience is there right now.
Let's boil it down. You guys have such different experience. What's been interesting about this is there is a stark choice. That said, let's boil it down to characteristics, qualities, qualifications. What is the single most quality any judge needs to have to sit on the Court of Appeals, in your opinion?
I think it's independence. That's the most important thing right now. What really concerns me about the court system is how it's becoming more and more politicized. And I think particularly here in North Carolina, because we elect judges, and the judicial races are becoming more and more political, it seems to me, every election. And that's a real challenge, I think. Nothing is harder for me to watch because of my passion for the Court of Appeals. I mean, I've devoted my life to improving the court, making it better, understanding the law of the Court of Appeals. And it's hard to watch this court that I love, having stood at that podium and looked around this amazing courtroom, all that history, and watch it get dragged down into the muck of some of this political fight that's going on, at the top of the ticket with all of these politicians. And I worry about that. I think we need judges who are independent. And one thing that I've done in my campaign that's really made me stand out is emphasize how I'm running a nonpartisan campaign. And a lot of folks, including my opponent, have done some things that I just didn't like. I mean, one example is sending out these spammy emails, raising money, saying, give me $10, give me $20 because, this or that event, those sorts of things. And those look to me too much like the political emails we get from politicians. And I've just said, I'm not going to do that. And actually, a lot of court watchers came to me and said, Judge Dietz, you're crazy. I mean, campaigns cost money, and this is one of the ways people raise money these days, is doing this. And I said, I can't do it. And instead, I've sent what are really educational emails to the public and to the bar that talk about the Court of Appeals, the work I'm doing there, explaining how the system works. And I really didn't know how they'd come off, but if you hit reply to those emails, it actually comes back to my campaign email address. And I was amazed at how many people responded and just said, thank you for sending this email that's educational and not political. And they said, you didn't ask for your vote, or my vote in these emails, but you're getting my vote because I appreciate that. And I think that's, when folks look at this campaign, that's one thing I want them to pay attention to, is how I've really defended the integrity of the courts and not engaged in kind of the political tactics that you see these days in real political races.
Mr. Rozier, final word to you. Boil it down to one characteristic that makes a great judge, whether they're where you are, where he is. What qualities anyone need?
I think fairness. What I have done is I've gone around the state and I've told people that because the legislature has decided that we should have party affiliation attached to our names, that they shouldn't expect anything out there. Judge Dietz is registered as a Republican, I'm registered as a Democrat, and so that party affiliation will be there on the ballot. But I've gone around and told people that when you look around at what's happening right now, without complete fairness, and as Judge Dietz describes, independence, there is a lack of integrity that is starting to come towards the courts. You can almost anticipate what the outcome will be in some decisions before the opinion is actually written. Some people go around and describe themselves as conservative. I'm going around and I'm telling people that I'm fair and impartial, and the decision that is rendered will be made based on the law and on the facts. Based on the situation that we have, I'm just surprised. I didn't expect Judge Dietz to necessarily describe me or describe disrespect, I suppose. It is a situation where the public financing for judges goes away. And so I'm at a loss, really. Judge Dietz outraised me, so he's getting the money from somewhere. But right now we're in a situation where we are trying to go out and inform the public. I haven't gone around and called up too many people asking them for money. I know a lot of Court of Appeals judges have to take time from their busy schedules. Instead of reading, they're making phone calls. I'm in district court. That's where I am. I can't afford the time to come off the bench and make phone calls because I have to do the work. Because my sole effort is to be fair. Because whenever you start advertising yourself as a conservative, then there is this lack of judicial independence. That impression is gone.
Mr. Rozier, Vince Rozier, Richard Dietz, both seeking a seat on the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Gentlemen, thank you so much for the 20-minute discussion. Very enlightening, very informative, and quite entertaining. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Cout.